Genesis. Book of beginnings, and that's really what it's all about. In Genesis, you have the beginning of God's revelation of himself to man. You have the beginning of the universe. You have the beginning of all the hosts of heaven. You have the beginning of all the inhabitants of the earth, including animals. You have the beginning of sin. You have the beginning of the redemptive story. And sin is, Genesis chapter 3 is where Adam and Eve fall. Genesis chapter 3 is where God introduces the redemptive plan in Genesis 3:15, where he says, to Satan, I will put enmity. I'll put enmity between her seed and your seed and her seed. You will bruise his heel, but he will crush your head. And Eve understood that to mean someone special is coming. And I think if you look at her response to Cain being born, I think she thinks Cain's the guy, because she's so thrilled. I have gotten a man-child from God. I think that's part of her thrill. But in Genesis, you have the beginning of sin, you have the beginning of the redemptive story, and you have the redemptive story then begin to get more clearly defined as you go. The line is clearly defined. It's not going to be Cain line, because Cain's going to be cursed. It's not going to be Abel, because Abel's going to be dead. It's going to be Seth, who's going to be the one who the line comes from. And as you walk through the genealogies of Cain, you walk through the genealogy of Seth, you see it go down from Seth down to Noah. In Noah, you have God's judgment of sin. And what I find interesting, with the Noah story is, and somebody pointed this out to me just a couple weeks ago, the parallel story of Noah with Genesis 3. How you have Noah, who is this guy who comes off the ark, was finding grace in the eyes of the Lord, comes off the ark. What does he do? He plants a garden. He plants a vineyard, and he proceeds then to eat the fruit of that vineyard, drink the fruit of that vineyard, and get drunk. And then sin reintroduces itself into the situation on a drastic level. I think it's important because it shows that even a flood couldn't wash away sin, because it wasn't a washing that had happened. It needed to be something that was totally purifying, and I think that's significant and important. So you have the beginning of the line of Messiah, and you have it narrowed down through the Abrahamic covenant. I considered, how do you do this? Do I list the different covenants that God made with man? That's one way to understand Genesis, is the series of covenants that God makes with man throughout the book of Genesis. Starts off with the Edenic covenant that he made with Adam. Eat from every tree of the garden, but don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We know Adam blew that. From that point, then after the age of, some would say, that promise, then he goes on and he says to Noah, not Noah, what's the guy's name? Adam, don't kill people. Basically, and Lamech starts bragging about how he's killed people. Cable killed his. I've killed multiple. I'm a great guy. And so it begins to degenerate from there, and then you get to the Noahic covenant, which Noah comes off of the boat, and God says to Noah, if man sheds man's blood, by man's will his blood be shed. That's where human government really is established. So in Genesis, you have the establishment and the beginning of human government, which is, I guess we should go back. The first institution of God is the family, established in Genesis chapter 2. Second institution of God is human government, established in Genesis chapter 9. Third institution of God is the church, established in the New Testament. So it's kind of interesting. So you have the beginning of that. You have the directing of the line through Moses, then through Abraham. The Abrahamic covenant is next, where God promises that Abraham, he's going to make of him a great nation. And then that promise is taken and passed to Isaac. That very same promise is passed to Isaac from Abraham, and then from Isaac to Jacob, who became Israel, and then he passes it to his 12 sons. That same promise of kingdom of blessing. And so you have the beginning of really redemptive history found in the book of Genesis. Why was Genesis written? I think that's also a good question to ask. it's easy to sit back 2,000 or what, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10,000 years later and take a look at the book and say, well, here's why I think it was written. But I think it's important to ask ourselves, what was Moses doing when he wrote the book? It was written by Moses, by the way. I fully believe it was written by Moses with source material. I think Moses refers to his source material when he says the book of the generations of. I think that's what source material Moses had when he wrote the book. And if you attended, and I think they're recorded. So when I started Genesis 3 years ago in Sunday school, I actually did that introduction, so you can actually maybe listen to that online and find out what that source material is. I don't want to take the time to do that tonight. But Moses wrote it, and why was he writing it? What was he doing? I think what Moses is doing in the book of Genesis is introducing the nation of Israel to God and God to them. I think that's what he's doing. He's saying, why would the nation of Israel, who spent 400 years in Egypt, think they had a right to ask for Canaan? Why would they think that? They would have no clue about Canaan. They are, in many senses, they're Egyptian. That's where they've grown up. They've grown up in the land of Goshen. And if you compare the land of Goshen to the land of Canaan, which is nicer?
Goshen.
Goshen is so much nicer than Canaan. Why would we need to go there? Let's just stay here. And I think that's what Moses is doing as he's writing Genesis, is saying, this is why we're going there, because God promised that to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and to us. And that's where we need to be. So that's what's happening as you read, as you walk through the book of Genesis. Man, there's so much to try to get in here, and it's just not going to happen in 5 minutes. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to stop. That's Genesis. Genesis is, for me, a very exciting book because there's so much there. There's so much happening there that's really exciting for me. And now, we're also going to do Job. We're going to move to Job now. I got through half a page of my notes on Genesis, so we're going to just go to Job. Job is, why do we put Job where he is? Why do we put Job after Genesis 11? And I think that's where we'll put Job. I don't know, I haven't looked at that Bible app for sure, but I think we should put Job after Genesis 11 or along with Genesis 11, before Abraham. We should put Job before Abraham. Why do we put him there? Well, it's because there are several things, several clues in there. One of the clues is Job's name. The name Job is not a Jewish name. The name Job is actually first seen in history in Egypt. It's an Egyptian kind of name. And it's a very old name. It's one of the oldest names that we know of on record historically. If you're a historian, Job is a very, very, very old name. It has its beginning history. Some other things about Job. If you read the book of Job, in most cases, when Job, especially at the beginning, when Job is referring to God, he calls him God, which is Adonai or El, not Yahweh. If Job fell after Moses, he would probably be referring to God as, especially when he's offering sacrifice, he'd be offering sacrifice to Yahweh, not to Adonai or to El. So that's the name he uses is a significant clue. The other thing that's a significant clue is Job is offering sacrifice. Job is offering sacrifice. If Job falls after Moses, then he is sinning when he offers sacrifice for his kids, because a parent can't do that. In the system, in the time of the patriarchs, that's what parents did. Abraham offered sacrifice for his sons. That was a typical thing to do. But in the time of the law, unless you were a Levite, and Job is not a Levite, unless you're a Levite, you were not to offer sacrifice. Ask Saul, ask King Saul about that, and see what he has to say about how wrong it is to offer sacrifice when you're not a Levite. So those are clues that I think place the date of Job where we put it. So that's why we're studying it where we are. Job is a great story of interacting between God and Satan. It's a real interesting story to watch some of the stuff that I think is going on in heaven. I think we get a window into the things that take place in heaven and to the work of the accuser and the adversary, and kind of gives us a clue of what he's doing even now as he stands before God and he accuses us of things. Remember, it's interesting as you get to Job chapter 1, it's not Satan that brings Job up. it's not Satan's idea to test Job, it's God's. Because, yeah, go ahead.
So where do you put the fall of the angels then? That would have to be before that, and that's in Isaiah, kind of.
Well, Isaiah points back to the fall of the angels. The fall of the angel has to happen for me. Okay, so this was Ruth that did this to us, not me. And I can't not answer this question. I need to answer this question. So if you need to leave at 8 o'clock, feel free to do so. I believe that the fall of the angels has to happen after Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, and before Genesis 3, verse 1. Has to happen somewhere there. Why do I say that? Well, because Genesis 1:31 says, "Thus were the heavens created and everything in them, and God said it was very good." Not just good, he says very good. If Satan had already sinned, and Satan was one of the hosts of heaven, Satan is the host of heaven. They're always referred, angels are referred to as the host of heaven. So I don't think he's talking about birds in this place. I think he's talking about even the hosts of heaven being very good. I don't think that would be an accurate statement for God to say, behold, everything that he made was very good. I think that would be inaccurate on his part. But it has to happen before Genesis 3, or as Genesis 3. So I actually believe, here we go, I think that it was almost a simultaneous fall with man. Here's why. Satan asked for 5 things, right? I will make my throne, and if you consider his position as the anointed cherub, he had all but one of those 5. He had all but one of those 5. As you're reading through Isaiah, when we get to there, read the 5 things he requests. And if you consider his position as anointed cherub, he had all but one. The one he didn't have was, I will be like the Most High. Right? What does he tempt Eve with?
You'll be like the Most High.
You'll be like God. You'll be like the Most High. Same sin. I think sin loves company, right? And if he's doing it, why not take not just a third of the angels? Let's take man with me too. So, that's absolute conjecture. Absolute conjecture. What I think I know for a fact is it happens between Genesis 1:31 and Genesis 3:1. That's what I would say for sure. But I do think it's interesting that it's the same sin. It's the same sin that they both fall for. So that's when I place that fall. There are a lot of smart people that place it kind of in between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. A lot of smart people do that based on what's taught in Ezekiel.
But that'd only be a day.
Well, some people see it's a lot longer than a day, so, but I don't. The main story of Job is I believe God's faithfulness to his people, to his person. Even though it looks like Job is being attacked by God, it's interesting that at the end of the book, he restores Job because of the faithfulness, Job's faithfulness to him. Job is restored he actually has 10 more kids, has everything restored, all his possessions restored to him. But I think the other lesson of Job is the right way to approach a trial. It's interesting, Job, as he first approaches the trial, his first response is an amazing response. After he loses everything, his response is, you know what, I was naked when I came, I'm naked when I leave, blessed be the name of the Lord. He blesses God for taking everything. And I don't think he's making that up. I think that's where he is. But then this chapter 2 happens. And Satan goes again and says, hey, God goes again and says, hey, look at Job. He didn't curse me like you said he would. And Satan says, yeah, because all you did was let me take his stuff. Let me touch him. And you watch how fast he curses. What I find interesting is even after Job was touched, he did not say, I curse you, God. Even with encouragement to do so from his wife. His wife comes out and, I really love her. There are some people that think she's a great woman. I think she's, hey, just curse God and die, buddy. Let's get this over with. You got life insurance. Let's get you out of here. She cursed God and died, and Job refuses to do it. Refuses to curse God, but that doesn't stop him from asking serious questions about what God is doing and railing against God. He is angry with God. If you watch Job's responses, Job is angry against God, and so he's open about that anger. He's open about that. I have not done anything. I don't deserve this. I'm getting it. And at some points he says, you know what, God's just not nice. He comes to this conclusion. God's just not, he does what he wants to do, and he's just not nice. And then he has these three friends show up who really try to speak truth to him and say, you had to have sinned, bud. You had to. God doesn't, and what I love about this is, you know, we look back at that and say, how can you say that, Eliphaz? How can you say that, Bildad? How can you say that to him? Understand, Genesis wasn't written yet. Moses is still 400 years away from writing the book of Genesis. So all Job knows about God is what's been told him, what's been passed down from generation to generation to generation. That's what he knows about God. And that's all any of these guys know about God. And so I believe they're doing their best. That doesn't give them a pass, because God says, Job, you better pray for those guys, because if you don't pray for them, I'm going to kill them because of their bad counsel to you. But what I love about Job at the end of it, when Job gets to the end and Job finally makes his case, God finally steps in. And God says, okay, you've said enough. I'm really tired of hearing from you. This is the Neil paraphrase of Job. I'm really tired of hearing from you. Now you stand there, you be quiet, and you let me talk. You let me ask you some questions. And what I love about it is God doesn't say, here's why I did what I did, Job. I did this because I wanted to grow you. I wanted to mature you. I wanted to deepen you in your faith. God doesn't do that. God says, where were you when I created the earth? Where were you when I did? By the way, can you hold the mountains up? Can you hold all the waters in your hand? Go ahead. And I love even God uses sarcasm. Okay, Mr. Man, Mr. Big Stuff, can you tell me? You got all the answers, you tell me. And God doesn't say why. He shows him who. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the right question to ask in a trial, is not why, but who. Who are you, God, and who am I? Because that's what Job finally comes to. Job comes in the book and says, I spoke things I shouldn't have said. Mm-hmm. I said things that should have never come out of my mouth. You talk now and I'll listen. You talk now, listen. And one of Job's conclusions is this: I know my Redeemer lives, and he'll stand at the last day. So that's what I love about Job, is it really unfolds who God is for a guy who's struggling. And I've been there. I've been in the struggle. I've been in an emotional, when my dad died 20 years ago, I was in an emotional struggle. I was deep in depression, deep in despair, not depression, despair, and was ready to throw it off. And really, it came to a reading the book of Job and some good counsel from really strong friends that told me, this is who God is, and you need to respond to God because of who he is, not because of what he's doing. So that's a real quick interview for the book of Job, or introduction to the book of Job. You listened well. I hope that helps. What I hope it does, beyond helping, is just to whet your appetite to read. And to read with excitement, and to read with energy, and to be excited about the things you're going to read, not just trying to check a box. Dave Brunner, he comes to my Thursday morning, and he knows how I hate box checking. I don't like the fact that the app has a box you can check.
Actually, a circle.
It's still a check.
It's a circle
Please don't read.
Check the circle.
Don't read so you can check the circle. Read so you can know God. That's what I encourage you to do. So anyway, that's all I got. Questions? Go ahead, Jerry.